Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Fox Cricket's podcast, The Follow On. My name's Courtney Walsh, a journalist with Fox Sports Australia, and I'm pleased to be, delighted to be joined today by Michael Vaughan, Fox Cricket expert, former English captain. He played 82 tests and 86 ODIs for England, 18 centuries as a test batsman. And I think speaking to us in Sydney today. How are you, Michael?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. On my way to Adelaide for the test match tomorrow, so looking forward to the second test.
A very busy man so far, but it was an extended break between tests, between the first test in Perth and the second test starting on Friday. What have you been up to? What does a commentator do in their off time between tests?
Well, I watched a bit of England versus New Zealand, so that was nice in between the games. Played a lot of paddle tennis, played a bit of golf with Brendan Julian. He's been spraying the ball everywhere, but managed to get it right yesterday, hit him quite straight. So we got our first victory as a partnership. But I stay down in the Coogee. I know you call it Coogee, but it's Coogee in my eyes. Train every morning, try and stay healthy. Every now and again I have the odd sherbet, but just trying to switch off. Once this second test starts in Adelaide, it pretty much goes back to back for the remaining 4 games. So to have a few days away from commentary and just chilling, it's been quite nice.
I was going to say, you see on social media before the Perth test, the photos of you and the rest of the crew wandering along the Swan River, which is a magnificent river, early morning, I suppose, wake up call. But do you jump into the ocean in Coogee, or do you or Coogee? Do you jump in the water, or do you do the rehab on the knees? What do you do?
I have been in the water, but I go to a place called S1 training and bathhouse. So I train in there, and I go in there ice baths and infrared saunas. So getting a little bit older, so I've got to look after the body. I actually went to the Prime Minister's house last night with Adam Gilchrist. He took me to an event there, which was nice on the water. He's got a nice pad. I'm a bit insecure about his security. It's not quite number 10 and the security that our Prime Minister has, but it was great to be at the Prime Minister's house. But it's always nice to be down in Sydney. Sydney around Coogee all the way to Bondi, walking through Bronte. It's one of the most famous walks that you can ever do. The Coogee to Bondi and back walk. It's a bit of a trek, and it's a bit of a sweat on, particularly for a Brit like me. But it's always great to do.
Did you manage to sledge Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, at Kirribilli House? Did you just give him a reminder about Australia getting beaten whilst England won the opening test in New Zealand?
Yeah, I mentioned that. Yeah, he was. I wouldn't say he was concerned by the Aussies. He just feels that obviously the Adelaide Test match is going to be a big week for them, and you're not a cricket kind of person if you don't realise that England are onto something. They're playing some decent cricket, particularly against the Kookaburra ball. You look at their record in New Zealand; it's very strong, and obviously next year with the Kookaburra ball, I think they've got a batting unit that will play quite nicely against it. If you can get a pitch or two that spins square, that's probably the best chance of really putting them under pressure. Nathan Lyon's the standout in terms of the spinners in both teams. But England are a good team to watch. They're good fun. They'll have weeks where it all goes a bit AWOL because it's the style that they play, but they're worth watching.
I was going to say, does it make are you the happiest Englishman alive when Australia gets beaten in the manner they did in India? And England, having been under pressure in that first innings, I think at 4 for 71 or so. Lost some early wickets in that first innings in England, as in New Zealand, to be able to pull off a victory like they did, and to blood some young talent. Very impressive performance overall.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Harry Brooks, a wonderful player. I mean, New Zealand are usually a safe pair of hands in the field, but they drop lots of chances. England threw in Jacob Bethel in at number 3. He gets a 50 in the second innings. Ollie Pope dashed nicely at number 6, and then Brydon Cars gets 10 in the match. So they're unearthing players that are doing well pretty much straight at the start of their test careers, which tells you that the culture around the team is very, very good. England are a very, very dangerous team. They're very hard to play against because they play high-risk cricket, highly intense cricket, particularly with the batting hand. And they pretty much work out that they don't look to bat 120, 130 overs. They get runs in 70, 80 overs and score quickly. So you have to find a way of getting them out quite quickly to nullify the scores being big. But if I was Australia, I'd be just focusing purely on this week. I think it's a big week in Adelaide. They know that they're going to have to respond. They're going to have to play better cricket. And I think the call at the toss is going to be quite important because batting first is going to be crucial for both teams.
We'll focus on the Australia-India Test series first, and then we might come back to England-New Zealand. But you talk about that toss. Australia's won 7 pink ball tests so far. But we were also so strong in Brisbane historically and so strong in Perth. Always I suppose there's always a first time. Are you concerned that this might be the first time, or does it really depend on the toss? Do you really think that can make a big impact on what happens?
I think the toss played a big part in Perth. I just thought that pitch, it did it slowly on day one and then got quicker as the day went on. And then obviously Bumrah produces a spell of bowling, which is up there with the best I've seen. India then bat on days 2. Australia were a little bit flat, didn't quite get it right, weren't aggressive enough in my eyes. And obviously Yashasvi Jaiswal is a wonderful player. And then you've got KL Rahul just dug in, and then Virat. And India just produced a really good performance. And, you go to the Adelaide Oval, I just think batting first is such a huge advantage. Because even if you bat badly on the first afternoon, you get bowled out and you're bowling with a pink ball under lights. So that's a huge advantage. If you bat really well, you're bowling with the pink ball under lights on the second evening. So I do feel that the toss in the pink ball games is always very, very important. Australia won 7 out of 7, so they'll be confident, but they'd won 4 out of 4 in Perth up until obviously India beating them. And I just think of recent times, whatever, and I don't know why, there seems to be a lot of teams winning overseas. You look at Bangladesh, look like they're coming back against the West Indies, New Zealand winning in India, England winning the first test down in New Zealand, India winning the first test here in Australia on the back of being whitewashed at home against the Kiwis. It's for whatever reason, it's quite hard to predict Test match cricket, particularly teams that are travelling overseas who seem to be playing that little bit better. It was only a few years ago that no one was winning away from home. And this recent time, there seems to be a few games that are being won. So, look, the toss, it can't be just that you win the toss, you win the game. You're still going to have to play good cricket, but I do think it's a big advantage.
I was going to say, I mean, and just maybe touch on that for a second. Is it because players are more familiar with each other due to things like the IPL or the greater access on YouTube, watching what unfolds, greater analysis? I think Alan Border, when I had a chat with him at the Fox Cricket launch at Federation Square in Melbourne, was talking about you'd hate to be a batsman these days because bowlers just know every part of what, if there's some strengths or some errors. He said when he was captain, he did it more on gut instinct and you would try and figure out a player from memory. I'm sure, perhaps 20 years ago you had greater access to video, etc. But when you were captaining, did you try and figure out what an opposition's batsman might be like more on feel or from memory than today where everything is analysed and dissected?
Yeah, I mean, and also, the batters know exactly what the bowlers are going to deliver. That's why Jasprit Bumrah looks like he's the standout, because he still surprises players with that release point, the pace, the skill levels. I very much had information, but I reacted out in the middle because, you can have as much information as you want. You're never quite sure how a pitch is going to play, what the conditions going to be like, and the situation that your team find yourself in. So you've just got to react as a captain out in the middle. But I'm not too sure why teams are suddenly starting to win away from home. I do think there's a lot of skillful bowlers around. I think we're in an era where there's quite a lot of skill in terms of the bowling around the world, and that's giving teams opportunities to get 20 wickets. We're not seeing massive scores. We're not seeing 400-500s on a regular basis. 300 seems to be the norm in Test cricket, which I like. I think that's a good kind of par score when the teams are scoring 350. The pitch obviously has a little bit of spice in it, and if you play well as a batter, you get a few runs. If you don't, you're going to be on your way back to the shed quite quickly, particularly against some of the quality that's on show with the bowling department. But I must admit that the day-night games, when it came into fruition a few years ago, I thought, it's great for the game. But I don't think, I'm not too sure Test cricket needs it. We tried it in the UK, it didn't really kick on. We get decent crowds anyway. The Adelaide Oval, Do you need a day-nighter to get the crowds in against India? Probably not. I know it's probably better for television, with obviously those last sessions into the pride time at night, which is very important because TV pays the big bucks for the rights. But I'm not convinced by day-night Test match cricket, particularly in Adelaide. I just think, and in Australia, I just think it's a little bit of an unfair advantage to the team that loses the toss.
And the quality of the product itself, admittedly, it was effectively a bit of a whitewash. But you talk about the toss in Perth, but you have got two champion teams going against each other at the moment, the number one and the number two ranked Test teams in the world. Next year, you have Australia-England, which is always the biggest series, obviously from an Australian perspective and presumably from an English perspective. They'll draw crowds, won't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I reckon next year, Perth, I would think there'll be 20,000 Brits for that first game, and they'll stay. They couldn't come to the last Ashes because of COVID times. And England always get a huge amount of people following. They're and particularly this team, they're a team that people like to watch. They're very enjoyable to go down to the cricket and watch because they play an expansive game, very likable group of players. I think they're very, very good with England supporters, the England players. They're very close to them. They go and give a bit of their time. So, and also, I genuinely think England will have a great chance. I've looked at England teams that have come to Australia in the last, since 10-11, and every time they've come, I've gone, I'm not too sure. I just don't think they can get anything. I just think Australia have been too good, too powerful. This Australian team are beatable. I genuinely think that they're beatable because of the lack of quality in the batting department. I think the bowlers are exceptional at the right times, but they're all over 30 years of age in a 5-match series. You're going to have to rotate somewhere, and maybe they're missing out of Josh Hazlewood this week. Maybe that's not a bad thing for Australia, to get Boland in or whoever and give someone else to go in that bowling department, because I think in a year's time, I think they're going to have to rotate. But this England side with Brydon Cars, Gus Atkinson, if Mark Wood can be fit, Jofra Archer, Ollie Stone, Josh Tong, England will arrive down here with a bit of pace. They really will. They'll have a bit of gas with them, and I think that's what gives me a little bit of hope. And also the batters play well against a Kookaburra ball. The ball doesn't do a great deal here. So players that like to throw their hands at the ball, you get away with it a lot more in Australia. And I just think it'll be nicely suited to the way that England play their cricket. If the ball spins, Australia will win. But it doesn't spin that often in Australia.
We're talking to Fox cricket expert and former English captain Michael Vaughan on the Follow On podcast. And remember, you can watch every ball live of the upcoming series, both Australia versus India, but also England versus New Zealand on 501, the Fox Cricket channel. Just talking about those fast bowlers from Australia in particular, Michael, Daniel Cheney, who's a good friend of the podcast, Code Sports journalist, had an interesting story today touching on Pat Cummins, the Australian captain, and the slight dip in pace, but also probably slight increase in economy rate over the last couple of years. I think he said he's gone from about 139, 140 down to about 136 kilometres an hour. The economy rate in Perth, I think, was 4.5 or so in the first innings and 3.8 in the second. He spoke to Damien Fleming, the former Australian paceman, swing bowler, about Cummins. And Fleming's comments I thought were interesting. He talked about Dennis Lilly, how when you get into your 30s, you have to adjust slightly. You can't rely solely on your raw pace, etc., and you up your skill set and do different things. Did you see anything in Perth that worried you? And the other factor is, do you see Pat taking the new ball, given the absence of Josh Hazlewood with that side strain?
Oh, I would think so. I mean, I would guess that it'd be Cummins and Stark, and Boland will come on first change. But pace is a lot for Pat Cummins. If he's down to 135, I think it gives the batters that extra little bit of time to adjust to the movement and the accuracy that he produces. We saw it in the Ashes actually a couple of years ago that when England got after him, and when England got after Australia, England looked like a team that were dominating. The field was spread, and run scoring became that much easier. He's a world-class performer, brilliant captain and a brilliant bowler. And the one thing I'll say is he did look short of a gallop in the first test. He's not been playing any cricket. not played any longer format cricket since March. So I would think this week in Adelaide, he'll be up on his paces because of what he did last week. I think the first test will be good for him. He's got some overs back into his body, into his mind, playing the longer formats back into his system. And I think he'll be better for it. But, it feels like a big week for Australia. The 1-0 down, and, the last time India were there, they bowled them out, for 36, blew them away. But they lost that series. And if you actually look at this Australian Test match team, they haven't actually won any big series. They've got the Ashes. They managed to draw 2-2. Anyone that was a real cricket studier, if it was a boxing contest, England had Australia on the ropes. The rain in Manchester, England blew them away in 2 games. The first 2 games at Edgbaston and Lords, England just played dumb cricket for 1 or 2 sessions and lost the game. But they were pretty much dominating the games, and that would be a concern if I was an Australian, because if you're looking at it really strategically in the way that this Test team have played, they haven't played consistently great for a while. That batting line looks very vulnerable, and when teams get the bowling attack into the 40th, 50th over and into their 3rd and 4th spells, you're always going to struggle up front against this attack because the high class, the world class. But if you can get them out of those first 2 spells and get them deeper into the innings, I've seen teams start to look like they can play a little bit with more comfort against this Australian side. And I guess when you can get on top against them, and India did that in Perth, the field spread, and it looked like it was quite a nice time for an Indian player to be out in the middle, and that's what teams are going to try and get the Australian team into. Whether you can is another skill set, because you've got to play great to get into that position. But that's, I would think, the kind of approach that teams will try and play against Australia, is to see off those first 2 spells and then really try to capitalise.
You talk about the fields being spread, in Perth, and we saw that in the Ashes when England were dominant in those couple of tests. Is that to do with? Do you have any lingering, not concerns, but I suppose a query or about the captaincy in that matter? Is that with Pat Cummins trying to, given his load with bowling, and we know we've had that discussion probably in the past, but is there any lingering concern there or a lingering query there for you? Or is it just a matter of the way the game unfolds as such?
There was times in the last Ashes series where it worked. The second innings at Edgbaston, it worked. They spread the field, and England just was silly. They made some errors against Nathan Lyon, and Australia won the Test match, a brilliant chase. So it worked on that occasion. It worked at Lords. England made some mistakes. Once England started to play with a bit more sense and realised they didn't have to play the high risk shots, just knock the ball around, it was around then that I thought Australia needed to adapt quickly. And I've watched England so many times over the last few years, and they're dangerous. They're hard to play against because the ball flies everywhere, and they've got all the tricks, and they play every shot in the book. But I think you've got to hold your nerve as a captain against an England side that's so dashing. You've almost got to bring the field in and say, go on, try and whack it through us. Might have one fielder cover point on the boundary, but you need catches in close, because England will give you opportunities. And if you just spread the field wild, those opportunities that you should be getting, you don't get, because you don't have fielders in catching positions. You get them all on the boundary. So I do think there's a method to play against an England side, but Pat Cummins, if you look at his record in cat, he's exceptional. And more often than not, he gets it right. And I guess when your team's up against it and the ball's flying around, most captains would react in the same fashion. You kind of spread the field and just hope something happens, or you hope for a mistake. Australia, when they're playing at their best, they don't look for a mistake from the opposition. They go hunting the mistakes because they bowl great, and they hunt as a pack in the field. And that's the one thing I saw in Perth in that second innings. They didn't seem to have that energy in the field, and that kind of that wolf pack, as they used to call them, that used to be kind of surrounding the batter, making it very awkward for players. Bit of chirp, bit more aggressive. I didn't see that in Perth, so I'll be interested to see if we see that again at the Adelaide Oval.
Alex Carey, the Australian wicketkeeper, who did bat pretty well in Perth, he talked about his surprise yesterday in Adelaide, saying that he was, well, I think the Australian team were a little stunned by the reaction to to that defeat and the magnitude of the defeat. You talk about the energy in the field there, and I think you and Ravi picked up on some comments from Josh Hazlewood, which you thought were interesting after the end of day 3 in the test in Perth. The Australians have since said, no, we're all united, etc. But your perception at the time, with the energy being down, it didn't look like a team quite in harmony or quite on song.
I don't know. I don't know whether that's fair or not, or right or wrong. But you can only comment on what you see. And the body language in the field in the second innings wasn't there. Yes, if we Giles was a wonderful young talent, but you go back 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, a young player comes to Australia with a great reputation. The Australians would just pepper him. I had it in 2002. They bombed me for about an hour. Can you play the short ball with all the fielders around the bat with a couple on the boundary? Go on, try and play Brett Lee or Andy Bickle, Jason Gillespie, Glenn McGrath, Steve Waugh, with a load of fielders chirping in your ear. I know it's a different era, a different kind of team and a different way of playing, but, you can be ultra aggressive without chirp, with body language. And, I was surprised that they didn't go aggressive at the young kid from, obviously, Mumbai, who plays great. He's got all the shots. But, if there's one area that I looked at was his right shoulder. Every time it got into his right shoulder, he was kind of flapping a little bit. And, it took Marnus, actually, to get the ball in hand. So I ball a few bounces. And the bouncer tactic can work. It worked against England. And I'll say to Australia, they bowled England out at Lords with the bouncer tactic. How many times have they reverted to that since? Not many. They tried it at Old Trafford, but they didn't get it right, and the ball was flying everywhere. And Zach Crawley put on a bit of a masterclass. But they haven't tried it that many times, from what I remember. And when you've got a player like Yashasvi Jaiswal, number one, it's a wicket-taking option. Number two, you're going to restrict the scoring rate if you bowl it well. And number three, if you ask any batter in the world, do they like being peppered for 40 minutes non-stop? There's not many that really like it. They might say some play it better, and some might say, oh, it's a bit of a challenge and it's quite fun. But fundamentally, no one likes to be peppered for a period of time. So, yeah, I would think we might see a bit of that from Australia this week.
Will it be Marnus with the ball in hand? Or more to the point, we've seen him again working exceptionally hard in the nets in Adelaide, spending a lot of time. He was the last to leave the session on Tuesday night, 2 days out from the test. It's clearly a very tricky time for a batsman when they're out of runs. What do you do? What have you heard? What have you sort of dissected from his performance? All the reports are that he's looking proactive in the nets at the moment, but how do batters fight through these sort of periods, and can you fight through them?
Oh, it's not easy. I mean, he's up against the best in the world in Bumrah, so it's not going to be easy for him. But I think Marnus plays best when he's looking to score, and I think that's the message I'd be giving to all the players on both teams is, you always need to have that mindset of looking to score. And the easiest thing is for us to tell him to do that. The hardest thing is to actually go out in the middle and do that. And all I'd ever say to a player that's out of form, and generally when you're out of form, when you're taking guard, you see fielders. You see three slips in the gully, you'll see a short leg, a backward point, a mid-off, and mid-on, you see them. When you're in real good mindset and confident form, and you're in a positive state of mind, you just see the gaps. You'll see that there's an opportunity at extra cover to score. You'll see a mid-wicket open. You'll see, there's no square leg on the boundary, so if it's short, you'll be able to take on the pull shot. And that's all I'll say to a player, in particular someone like Marnus, go and see the gaps. When you take your guard, look at the gaps, that's where you're going to get your runs. Don't even worry about the fielders, because they're a great coach of mine. When I was a kid, he always used to say, remember the three slips in the gully, they're just there to watch your bat. They're just there to have they've got the best seat in the house to watch you bat. And that's all I'll be saying to all the players is that, if you can, try and make sure you look at the gaps, and that's where you're going to score your runs. And if you can think like that, you'll be in a more positive state of mind.
I might just drag you back to England, New Zealand, but more broadly, perhaps whether there's an issue overall. Ben Stokes, both New Zealand and England were docked points for slow over rates. In Perth, the first day, 77 overs were bowled. Now, I remember you and a couple of others last year, and it was a great chat at the SCG talking about time lost to light. time lost to light, and perhaps a little bit of spinning your own, and how fans pay to see as much cricket as you can. Has cricket got a slow over rate problem, or was this more too much of a were the penalties too harsh, and why can't we get through 90 overs in 6.5 hours of play?
Well, there's that many more delays, and there's reviews for everything these days. So I understand that, but I just don't think there's enough intensity to get the overs in. I personally would just make them play the overs. I know it'd affect probably terrestrial stations because they've got to get off at a certain time, but most of the world are on pay-per-view, dedicated sport cricket channels. And I'll be saying to the players, by the way, you're bowling the overs. So what that would do is make sure that the players would know they'd get through the overs in the first two sessions, because they wouldn't want a 40 over last session because it goes on forever. I think they know that the fines don't affect them. The World Test Match Championship points, obviously, it's affected England more than any other team. That's why they're so low down in the championship. But the other thing is, I totally am with the game needs to be played at a quicker rate, and players need to get on with it a little bit better. And I like celebrations, but when you see a celebration for 100 going on for about 4 or 5 minutes, you're like, come on, get on with the game. And that's a few little things that have come into the modern game which can kind of be quite easily wiped out. The other thing that you could do, if you're down on your over rate after day one, the opposition get runs. I'll guarantee that the over rate will quicken up then. But you then look at the over rates and you start looking at how much leeway these match referees seem to give the players. There seems to be a lot of leeway. But then I'll look at the other side of the fence, and you look at England and New Zealand both being penalised for slow over rates in that first Test match in Christchurch. But the game finished in 4 days, and it was a great spectacle. And every single support that went into that crowd, a sellout crowd at the Hagley Oval, were royally entertained. And you'd say that the crowd there were probably not even thinking about the over rates. So as much as the game needs to speed up, I do think the modern game of Test match cricket is becoming a great spectacle. I don't see too many boring draws or really flat wickets. There's not many these days where 550 play 550. The first Test in Pakistan, England won by getting 800. It was a real row, but they ended up winning the game. I'm enjoying Test cricket. I think it's becoming a really good product, and we just got to make sure that the pain. But the best way to analyse, it's like you pay your $100 or whatever it costs to go and watch a Test match. 90 overs is the allotted amount of overs that you should be seeing for what you've paid. And there are times when I guess 10, 12, 13% of the overs aren't bowled. If you got 13% back on your ticket price, I'd guarantee the administrators be telling the players to get on with the overs.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I might just before we wind up, a couple of questions and probably a couple of softballs for you, Michael. But Brett Lee, you talked about being peppered by him in 2002. Now, coming up to the 25-year anniversary of his debut for Australia in the Boxing Day Test against India in 1999. I want to know just how quick was he, and what is he a nicer bloke than what he was with the ball? Nicer bloke with the microphone in hand than what he was with the ball in hand when you were facing him?
Oh, man, yeah, he's one of the great men. Yeah, he's fantastic. Great team member on Fox, but he was a different cat when he got the ball in hand. He wanted to hurt you. He openly admits that he wanted to hurt batters. And you know what? In the game, we've got a bat in our hand, we've got a helmet, plenty of protection. If I was a quick bowler, I think I'd have a similar mindset to try and put batters off their kind of movement with real aggression, body language. The one thing Brett did, he showed you the ball. He had a beautiful action. There's one or two bowlers who probably through the air weren't quite as quick, but felt quicker because they had more unorthodox actions. Shoaib Akhtar, you lost the ball with Shoaib. It kind of went behind his elbow at times. He could subflex that elbow and he kind of wears the ball. And Mitchell Johnson was quite similar. He sometimes lost the ball from round his back, which made it very, very difficult. Dale Steyn I found very, very difficult to pick up as well. But Brett was completely up there with the quickest that I faced. But because he showed you all the ball, you felt you had a half a chance. But when he was swinging it, particularly that Kookaburra ball, the opening burst, when he was hooping it around corners away from right-handers, he was a real hard proposition to face.
And we touched on this at the start, but it's a passion of mine, and I know you've been very involved. But you've got paddle basically. You heavily invested in paddle. Now, for those that are not necessarily initiated, it's a very popular sport, particularly through Europe. Very big in Spain, through parts of Scandinavia, etc. A hybrid of squash and tennis would be the best way to describe it, would it, Michael? And what got you attracted to it, and your, I suppose, your investment in it, and both from a physical perspective, but also I suppose you're also involved in spreading the game through the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture of mini tennis and squash, mini court, underarm serve. It's the most diverse game that I think I've seen across all sports, because we were involved in creating the Paddle Club UK a few years ago, and the age gaps that we have playing on our courts, from 5-year-olds right through to 90-year-olds. Boys, girls, men, women, grandmas, grandpas, such a diverse set of different religions that come into place. It's absolutely the game to just get families together. We go and play as a four, the family. We all fall out because we all want to win. But it's such a great game just for one, fitness. I don't think you need to play too many games to get okay. I think tennis is too hard for anyone just to pick up because of the serve, whereas underarm serves in paddle, and everyone kind of picks it up quite quickly. And it's also very social. Lots of sitting around, having a brew, having the odd beer, music kind of playing as you're playing. And I'm thinking, it's getting quite big in Australia. I play in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, with a lot more courts I think that are arriving. You mentioned Europe, Portugal, Spain. Their courts are pretty much on every street. In the UK, I can't remember what the amount of courts we have in the UK at the minute, but it's growing rapidly. It's the sport for everyone. All the footballers are obsessed with it. So, if you've not tried paddle tennis, I know pickleball is becoming quite popular here in Australia. Get yourself down to your local paddle club and give it a go.
Just one, because you talked about that competitive edge when you're up against a family, but when you play against some of the Australian guys here, who's the best, and who would you like to partner?
Tom Morris, the journalist. I played against Tom, and he just tears around the court. He's got no discipline, so he's quite easy to beat. Gilly's very, very good. Huss, Mr. Cricket. Yeah, Mr. Cricket's excellent. I've seen players like Sam Billings is good enough to be a pro. Josh Butler's excellent. Alex Hales is excellent. I think A.B. de Villiers, as you'd expect, is a complete natural and can play to a very, very high standard. It seems to be the go-to game for all cricketers as well around the world. I see them all on Instagram, wherever they are, Saudi, whether it's in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, South Africa, New Zealand, wherever they seem to be travelling at the minute, they're finding paddle courts, which is great. It's a great sport for that.
Look, Michael, thank you so much again for joining the Follow on the Fox Cricket podcast. We had you last year. It's a pleasure to have you on again this year. And really looking forward to seeing you in Adelaide, and hoping it's a great pink ball test.
The Aussies have to win.
Could be a long summer.